All right, good morning. Happy Friday. We made it. You get 2 days off now, so it's a good day. And we have a great session coming up for you. Would like to wait about another minute, minute and a half to get as many participants in before we get started. So if you just check your mute button and just be patient for a couple minutes, we'll wait on everyone to be able to sign in and be ready to go. So thank you very much. All right, we'll give it about 30 more seconds as I see the numbers ticking up here a little bit. So 30 more seconds and we'll get started. Good morning and welcome to the second Kentucky Summit, the final day here. As I said before, it's Friday, so everybody can smile. They can stop and take a deep breath, and you know you conquered another week, and you'll be getting a couple days off, hopefully. Just wanted to let you know we saved some of the best for last. We've had a wonderful set of sessions the past 2 days, and today we have a great set of panelists that want to share a little bit with you about economic development strategies to leverage Kentucky's Riverports and freight network. Again, I'll just give you a real quick. You guys are all experts by now. Been doing this for a couple days. I know I can probably close my eyes and tell you where the buttons are, but mute is on the bottom left. Please use that wisely. Don't want to be that person that is taking a call and everyone else is hearing it. Also use the chat button. We really get a lot of use out of the chat button. And if we're not able to get to all the questions and answers, we are logging them and we will respond to them following this last day of the summit. So as you can see, there's a reactions button, so you can react, raise your hand. If you want to ask a question verbally, we ask that you would turn your camera on and just wave your hands all around until we see you and make sure that that you get your question in that way. So please see this as the last session where we can have some interaction, we can chat, we can talk about these innovative strategies moving forward. So today's session is following this past 2 days of just very strong insight from stakeholders, from industry experts, from various panelists and state and federal agencies and departments. And today we brought together economic specialists and experts that can really help to direct and guide the process of economic development with the Riverport markets. The session will go from about 10 to 10:30, 10 to 11:30, sorry. And then we'll have a little bit of time at the end that we'll be able to let both Chandler, the project manager on the consultant side, and Jeremy Edgeworth on the state side to give their insights and thank you all and do a proper send-off. So with that being said, I'd like to just hand it over to Kevin Johns, who will be the moderator for this session. Kevin is an expert in economics. He was the director of economic development for major metropolitan areas like Austin, Texas, and Palm Beach, Florida. He in both of those situations was very engaged with the ports in those states to make certain that the economic development programs that they put in place included those freight generators and the ways that they provide economic benefits for their communities and for the broader communities that they send and receive freight goods from. He also worked for Parsons Corporation and several other major companies throughout his career, providing economic expertise. So with that being said, we'd like to thank Kevin for putting together this expert panel, for meeting with them in advance to chat about ideas and concepts, and to kind of bring in the concepts that were discussed in our economic meetings that we've had in the prior weeks with the ports. So with that being said, Kevin, I'd like to hand it off to you, and we can go ahead and introduce the panel.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you all, especially the Cabinet for Transportation, Jeremy, thank you, and Cabinet for Economic Development, Christina. This is a great opportunity to work with such a distinguished group of port and economic leaders across Kentucky. As you heard from Jimmy, the goal here is to begin to assemble a toolkit for economic development that will enable the port system to attract more in public and private investment. And those strategies then, of course, are how to generate more return on investment. And we've discussed, of course, the business intelligence of the cargo movements, but our speakers today will talk about strategies that they're deploying in economic development that provide the validation of the ports themselves and give them a mechanism or a series of mechanisms that will attract more revenue streams. So our first speaker, I'm very happy to say, Anthony Ellis, is the Executive Director of Kentucky Innovation. If you'll take a couple minutes, maybe just 30 seconds for each one of these speakers, it'll give you some background. So I'll be quiet, let you look at this for a short period so you can get a good feel for Tony. Also, I was very pleased to hear in earlier discussions with Tony that the innovation, the Kentucky Innovation already has established innovation hubs in 3 of the Kentucky ports. So for all the port directors, I think his discussion will be especially valuable. So Jimmy, do you want to move to the next slide, or do you want to let Tony speak while we have his visuals up here?
Sure, sorry, I was trying to hit my mute button and it was being tricky on me. We can do it either way. Anthony wanted to present his own slides, so I can stop sharing, and Anthony, you can present your slides, and then we can do it that way, and then we can have the open discussion at the end.
That works for me.
Sounds good. All right. I'm going to stop
go.
sharing and let you go ahead and just hit that green share button at the bottom on your panel there.
Okay. Here we go. Can everybody see that now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Good morning, everybody. As noted, my name is Anthony Ellis. I'm the Executive Director for KY Innovation. I'm really excited to be able to have this chance to talk to the port community. One of the things we've been talking about internally within the cabinet is how big of a opportunity there is to work with our Riverports and our water transport community on a number of initiatives that we have going on within the Cabinet for Economic Development and at the state level. I've been asked to sort of outline generally the programs that we have, and then hopefully that'll stimulate some discussions during the panel session and after this community gathering to really talk about ways that we might be able to incorporate port activity and water transport activity into our mission and our programs. So with that said, and again, I just want to say thank you as well to Transportation Cabinet for setting this up. And I'm really looking forward to hearing a number of the speakers that we're going to have present today. I think this is hopefully going to be a really great session for all of us. So just a little bit about where we've been and it's in terms of an innovation community. Kentucky was really at the forefront of statewide support for innovation beginning back in 2001, at a time when a number of states were really talking about different programs that they could start. Kentucky passed the Kentucky Innovation Act, created 3 different state investment funds, and really partnered with a group called the Kentucky Science and Technology Corporation, which is a nonprofit that's based in Lexington, to create the Kentucky Innovation Network, which were 12 regional offices. Some of you may have seen them before. There was a regional office in Louisville, Somerset, Moorhead, Paducah, that provided direct outreach and sort of an information portal for that entire region about ways to get seed financing, ways to set up angel investment programs, ways to help with small business development and support, how to do a business plan, a lot of stuff that you know, how to get a startup to go from an idea to scalable growth or commercialized technology. In 2018, there was a discussion that we needed to rethink the Kentucky Innovation Act and rethink the programs we had. So for a couple of years, there was a lot of development phase, and where we are today is really a 3-tiered system. So the main tier that we have is we consolidated from 12 regional offices to 6 public-private partnerships. We're really excited about the opportunity for these public-private partnerships. Each of them is really meant to be an air traffic controller. So they're designed to know all of the resources that exist within a community, including the corporations and the innovation people in sort of your big companies, the startups that are working in their space, the funders and investors that invest in that region or those technologies, and the university partners that are helping in the commercialization and licensing and research space. So the 6 that are spread out around the state right now are Awesome Inc. in Lexington, SOAR, which is based in Pikeville, but covers basically the Appalachia region, Blue North, which is based in Covington, but covers Northern Kentucky, Grow West in Paducah, which is a combination organization between Sprocket in Paducah, Madisonville Economic Development, and Murray State University, Amplify in Louisville, Kentucky, and Crick in Bowling Green, which partners up with the center there in Bowling Green, affiliated with Western Kentucky. That's our earliest hub. We just started financing it last year, and we're already seeing a lot of growth and opportunity coming out of Crick. So those hubs are going to be sort of the front door for any involvement that any organization wants to have in the innovation ecosystem. They're going to have access to the statewide database, so they're really good at providing information. They'll be able to make warm introductions between the startup community, the economic developers, the innovation people and corporations, the funders, and even government to help make those, to create those networks, to stand up industry clusters similar to the Louisville Healthcare CEO Council, or what we have going on in Northern Kentucky around logistics and supply chain, and really operate to serve in that central hub role. The second thing that we have going on, and the hubs are really outside of the university system. They're ideally meant to be everything that happens outside of the university footprint. Our second program, which is inside the university system, is Kentucky Commercialization Ventures. So this is a program that's received national prominence as an innovative solution for helping to commercialize university technology, expand applied research programs, gain a higher share of federal research grants and private foundation research grants, and help turn those ideas and research programs into marketable, scalable growth companies within the communities around the university system. So this was started earlier in 2020. It's already starting to see success and wide adoption. It's a public-private partnership with every public university of higher education, including the community and technical college system, UK, U of L, Murray State, Northern Kentucky, Western, Eastern Kentucky University. Every single institute of higher education that's publicly financed is a part of it. It's based within the Kentucky Science and Technology Corporation as the administrative managing agent and funded through the Cabinet for Economic Development. It basically set up an entrepreneur in residence program. So bringing successful entrepreneurs who have marketed and commercialized technology and sold it into the universities to help figure out what assets they have and what research could be commercial and marketable. It's working directly with the inventors at those institutions to try to transform their ideas into a company. And we established two things. One, which is a statewide tech transfer office. A lot of universities simply can't afford to have a fully scaled tech transfer office with IP data protection or a full-time lawyer. We've provided that for the entire state. And the other thing that we're working on, and this is in development, we intend to launch this hopefully by the end of the year. The first one out of Northern Kentucky is a free legal clinic for startup companies and companies looking to commercialize technology that can provide some really basic legal advice. It's based on a program out of Colorado called Silicon Flatirons. That program has been nationwide and even international success story. We've worked closely with them. We're bringing that to Kentucky. And we've already got a few technologies that have been commercialized and that are in that pipeline right now, even though the program is only 6 months old. So the next thing we do is the third prong is we fund. We do a lot of direct investment into companies and programs to help commercialize technology. The grant funding program, and our biggest one, is the SPIR STTR Support and Match Program. The federal government's largest way to fund commercialization is through the SPIR STTR program. We provide free services through the KIP program that comes through both us and KSTC to work with companies directly to help them get those SPIR STTR grants initially. And then we provide a matching program for both phase 1 and phase 2 grants. So phase 1 is the early stage, we're just at idea. Phase 2 is a little bit more advanced, really working towards commercialization at that point. We've given out there's been 700 federal awards for $130 million. I believe that we're right around $40 million in matching funds. So we're really excited about that program. It's generated a lot of jobs and we've really seen success from those companies. It's helped us recruit and attract companies from outside the state. And something I'm very excited to announce, because this is very new, is we just created an accelerator program within the SBIR STTR grant program specifically focused on DoD dollars. The Department of Defense is the largest funder by far. And the nice thing about getting a DoD SBIR STTR award is that it comes with a contract. So most of the divisions, most of the SBIR programs say, if you can figure out how to make this work, we will buy it from you. There's a lot of opportunity for Kentucky to grow and expand its DoD grant funding. We're hoping that this accelerator program and both outside interest and federal interest that it's attracting will help us do that. The other way that we fund is through direct investments, both direct cash investments and through tax credits. So we have two different funds. One is the Kentucky Enterprise Fund, which focuses on early stage companies. We make an equity investment of usually in the $25,000 to $50,000 range to really help startups develop their technologies. And Commonwealth Seed Capital, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the cabinet, makes some larger investments into companies that seem to have real growth opportunity. We also have an angel and angel fund tax credit of $6 million in total per year that really encourages people to make those early stage investments into companies that are a little bit riskier. We have two other small business programs that apply outside of the startup space really to any small business. One is the Kentucky Small Business Tax Credit, which provides tax credits for hiring employees or buying new computer equipment. It's got a lot of interest. It's up to $3 million a year. And the Kentucky Small Business Credit Initiative, which provide sort of that extra layer of collateral support to help banks make loans directly to companies that may be right on the edge of creditworthiness. It's been a very successful program. We've ran it for 10 years. And in fact, the most recent version of the federal legislation around the COVID crisis is going to provide additional funding and support for the KSBCI. So I want to talk a little bit about what our priorities are going forward, just so that you can see sort of where our mission and vision is. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about some ways that just, I think, are easy ways to connect the Riverport community into this innovation ecosystem, and some collaborative ideas that I think can add real value to the great work you guys are already doing. So one is connectivity. There really wasn't, even though there were separate offices around the state, there really wasn't any way that all of these offices were connected. We've really focused on making sure that they're all using shared databases, that they all have access to the same information at a statewide level. And that's going to help our hubs and KCV serve the community in a much more efficient and effective manner than we were before. You know, our mission at the end of the day is really to help people who take the risk to start companies, to help entrepreneurs be successful. We've instituted a lot of metrics, data, and transparency. There was no real tracking system before. In the past year, we've really instituted some strict metrics through goal setting, and we've seen them hit these metrics, which is very, very exciting. And we're becoming very data forward and data focused, and then publishing it. We're very transparent. You know, on our website, you're going to be able to find information about what our goals and metrics are as soon as our website is finished in June. And we're going to be providing a regular annual report and quarterly update to the community. Diversity and equity inclusion, just thinking about not just by race or gender, but also, you know, we're doing a lot of stuff for veterans. There's a huge opportunity for people with disabilities to be brought into the community. The governor is very fond of saying, you know, ability is everywhere and opportunity is limited. We view our job and our mission to go out and expand that opportunity and capture all of the people that we know have the ability to provide real value and grow our ecosystem. One way that we were doing that early, before the COVID crisis began and the pandemic, was through childcare. We had a lot of evening events and weekend events. It's very difficult for a lot of people to attend those just because of a childcare problem. So we've started to provide childcare and intend to do that again when we go back to in-person events at all of our events. So, and with childcare, it's not just going to be an opportunity, a free childcare solution, but also food. Because if you show up at 5:30 and there's no real food option, you're going to have a hungry group of kids, and that's not usually the best way to have an event. Industry clusters is an area where we really think there's a lot of opportunity for the Riverport and water transport community. So we have done an asset map of the entire state to look at where we have real research strengths, where our companies are really strong, where we're leaders nationally, you know, like advanced manufacturing and logistics, and we are building clusters. There's been 2 so far. The Louisville Healthcare CEO Council is a great example of where 12 CEOs of the largest healthcare companies in Louisville got together and said, we need to really emphasize and value innovation. So they built a cluster, they meet monthly, they started a fund, they hired an executive director to run the program. They brought in different innovation spaces such as aging and advanced mobility, and have really seen that grow over the past 3 years. There's an excellent executive director, Tammy York-Day, that runs it. We want to build that around every single area where we think we can add value. So advanced metals, we've got one with advanced manufacturing and logistics. We've got one that's developed around agritech, and the governor's really pushed that since he was elected, and we've seen incredible growth and opportunity out of that sector. We've got a cluster that we're building around data analytics and AI, and really in Western Kentucky, many people may not know this, but they have one of the strongest financial tech sectors in the nation. In Lexington, a lot of people don't know this. They have one of the strongest game development clusters in the nation. So we're working with the people involved in those different industries to really build that same structure out so that it's a one-stop shop. You can go in, get all the pieces to make it successful. We provide back office support and really grow that. The next is in maximizing investment dollars. We're getting a lot more strategic about how we're spending our money. So We have a strategic growth plan for how we're going to do that, run it more like a venture capital fund with a fund structure where we can really track our progress and align where we're spending our money with our priorities, such as through our industry clusters and creating funds directly to support those clusters. And our last space, which is true in every area of the country and really across the world, is we need to do a much better job at developing our talent and attracting talent to the region. There's a talent shortage nationwide for people that can, handle the new technologies that are coming up, from cryptocurrency to blockchain to new coding to even developing the robotic systems. These people are in high demand across the United States and internationally. Now that remote work is such a ready and available tool, we're doing everything we can to market Kentucky as a place where they can be successful. We know that you can create $1 billion business here because we've seen 5 of them in the last 3 years. We know that you can have a really good quality of life here in Kentucky that is just not available in a lot of the larger cities. And we know that there's a market for those people that want that better quality of life. People that have been sitting in a 2-bedroom apartment for the past year with children are very excited to think about their alternatives, moving from a New York or San Francisco or an LA. We want to make sure that Kentucky is positioned as top of mind for those individuals. And we've got a lot of programs set up for the next year and how to attract them. So that's a general overview of where we are as a state and what our priorities are for innovation. I would encourage all of you that are interested in participating in the innovation economy to contact us. And we'll be happy to work with you directly on how to plug you in with your local regional hub, on getting you connected to the advanced logistics, distribution, and manufacturing cluster, where I think there could be some real opportunity there. Just thinking about Riverports and barge technology, we've got AI issues for remote operated and controlled barges. We've got ways to improve efficiency at the dock for Riverports themselves, for, ways that we can have communication with the barges and how they're coming into the ports, to making the in and out process a lot more efficient. So we're very excited that you invited us to attend this conference, and we're excited to work with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Tony. I'd like to, before we introduce the next speaker, I would just like to kind of give a quick couple of thoughts. I encourage all of the ports to consider the advantages of aligning with the Innovation Hub strategy. There are 2 major financial benefits. The first, if there is an innovation hub either at the port or in the adjacent community, you are more attractive to public and private investments. Both federal, state, and private sector are going to want to link to this new talent pool, this new area of innovation that is tied to our infrastructure investments, our education investments. So number 1, it will attract more money. 2, if it's in the communities where the ports sit, then the ports cities become more prosperous. And when they become more prosperous, they can develop tax incremental finance districts, community improvement districts, business improvement districts, and partnerships with the ports. And the ports can receive direct revenue streams from that as a result of the innovation hubs being part of the port family. So the next speaker is going to be Adam. Adam is in, I believe, Los Angeles, but I know California, and is currently negotiating an incredibly large modernization of the ports of Los Angeles and the ports of Long Beach. Take a minute and look at his resume, please. Adam, thank you for joining us this morning. And also, I'd like to thank the International Economic Development Council for being our liaison. I know you're very active with that organization as well as your work nationally and globally. If you could speak to this wonderful network of inland ports that are looking to modernize their host system for the 22nd century, would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Kevin. Good morning, everyone. We appreciate the invitation, and I'll give you a handful of slides on a little bit about the context of what we work on, and maybe some observations about thoughts about Kentucky and places like that. I should say, in listening to Tony speak ahead of this, fascinating that you put on this statewide discussion. I guess this is part of a larger discussion that you've been having. But we don't hear, we work around the country and other parts of the world. We really don't hear a lot of discussion around innovation and logistics from the policy level. A little bit, but not a whole lot. So thank you for the invite. I will go through a handful of slides and happy to answer any questions. Let's go on. We advance to the next slide. Maybe I'm not seeing the slides, so.
No, they're not on yet. Just you can chat for a little bit, Adam, about what you're doing.
Well, yeah, the first slides are really just to give you context about us. So Global Logistics Development Partners, we do three things. First thing we do is we work with companies that have a global footprint on their supply chain network, their strategy, a lot of corporate strategy in that. And out of that sometimes comes work around focusing on where facilities are. So site selection sorts of things. It'll be, network planning. Let's be more efficient. We're starting to source from here, less from here. Let's close these two down and open a new one somewhere else. You can go to the next slide. The second thing we do is we focus on basically infrastructure and development projects around logistics hubs. So airports, seaports, inland ports, and we stand projects up. We think we have a real good idea of what's going on in key markets and supply chain verticals. And the intelligence of where things are headed, it's what's on the vessel, what's in the hold of the airplane, in the box, the pedigree of that, what's driving the future of that. Is this supply chain lane going to be more advantaged in the future or less? What do we do about that? Is there anything we can do about that? And where do we position ourselves? How do we then finance the infrastructure to support that and develop that business? The last thing we do, and listening to Tony again, he touched on these sorts of things. We focus on mobility and automation. And so that's essentially the next generation of the technologies of how people and things move. And we've developed some test complexes for Google and Intel and Toyota and a number of other companies. But at this point, we're also working on the intersection of logistics and advanced propulsion systems, so that's clean energy, and automation, autonomy. So next slide. And just for context to kind of the world that we sit in, we work with a spectrum of different sorts of players as partners. So on one hand, we work with investors, investments in new airport districts and new airports and new infrastructure and new rail infrastructure and so forth. Very focused on partners that are involved in that mobility space that I spoke about. So companies that make automated equipment and plan next generation logistics hubs. Very large companies that are essentially building logistics districts, or what we're referring to as investment districts. that are really global in scope, and they're multifaceted companies that are making investments in airports and seaports and so forth. The big engineering and infrastructure planning firms, and then a whole raft over to the right of as an example, the kinds of firms that are really a big part of their future is in logistics and related. So next slide. Kevin mentioned, and just again for context, we work in the US and other places, but we're developing some inland ports. The project in California would be the largest in the world. It'd be 425 miles long and several new intermodal districts and so forth. But then a series of other projects, again, as I described, around airports and seaports and so on. So let's go to the next slide. In the context of our work, what are the kinds of industries or supply chains that we particularly focus on? We focus on others as well, episodically or as opportunities arise. But we didn't think about e-commerce a lot, I got to tell you, 5 years ago. We knew what it was and we bought things, but it wasn't a big part of our business, and it is today. But the rest of what shows up on that slide is about manufacturing. So our interest, certainly as we work on projects that touch and intersect or sometimes partners with the public sector, is it's really not about logistics as a noun. We think of logistics as a verb. What we mean by that is we think of logistics as a means to an end. So if logistics can create that connectivity, those efficiencies, especially with use of technology, and pouring money into, frankly, first-class, world-class infrastructure, then we're going to create opportunities in the right competitiveness setting for production. And I think that's mainly our focus is that balance between production and distribution, essentially. Next slide. So some thoughts. We are not the world's expert on the inland waterway system. I did used to work in the port business in Europe and ran a seaport on the Great Lakes in Cleveland. Spent a lot of time working with the inland waterway system policy in Washington and with other ports and the Maritime Administration and the Seaway Development Corporation and Management Corporation. So we understand it a bit. But here are some of our observations. This is especially in the context of our work with shippers, but then investors. And I focus a little bit more on the investor side of this. So we would say that the US logistics system, the assets, are generally fairly underdeveloped as compared to other parts of the world, and certainly in terms of their plans for growth. We work with a lot of airports or seaports that just can't grow. For a whole lot of reasons, environmental, or they're in the wrong place, or otherwise. The inland ports system, we would say, is the most underdeveloped logistics category in the US. And we know that there's some investors that have said that to us and said, when an investor works with us or comes to us, they want a project to invest in. And they're not patient enough to develop that project themselves. So if it doesn't sort of naturally pop out, there's a handful of folks, not a lot, but like us, that try to stand up the project and facilitate, the development of that project and cocktailing the investment. The most of the assets are publicly owned in the U.S., the logistics system. They're generally operated in silos. So in our experience, when we talk to an airport director or a seaport director, they may be in the public sector, but they may go to the same dinners with the economic development directors and other kinds of people, but the businesses are relatively separate. And I know every place says it's not, but typically it is. If we have a logistics investment proposition, we go to an economic development person, they will usually say, go talk to the port. And then the port's busy running the port, frankly, in most cases. In a lot of our supply chain work, the corporate side, folks, I would say it's not absolutely dominant yet, but it is growing very, very quickly, of companies that in a lot of different sectors and spectrum of industry are saying to us they want a port-centric option. It's not the term they use, but they're saying they don't want to handle their cargo more than they have to, and they want transparency and visibility, and they want to see assets that they can invest in near an airport or a seaport. Um, or an inland port, which we would say is a combination of really both of those, because our inland ports are connected to airports, and even if they're far inland, they are directly connected to a seaport. Sometimes inland waterway system, and absolutely a blue water port on the coast, one way or the other. The legacy assets, the less assets been around for a long time. Certainly, most of the inland waterway system probably fits this category, or dominated by legacy cargo business. So it's about what has moved on the system, and there's probably good reason why some of that hasn't changed all that much. But in some cases, it has changed. Our experience with smaller inland ports is that the revenue and expense balance is in some cases kind of out of whack, because they're small assets and they tend to have fairly large expenses as compared to their revenue. So you can check that in whether that applies in Kentucky or not. We sort of funneling down, I think we would, when Kevin called, IEDC called, we know Jeff Finkel from a long time ago. The idea of a state thinking about a statewide system is quite interesting, actually, intellectually interesting, at least. We don't see a lot of federal policy. We are working with the US DOT right now on some strategic projects, in California. But there's not a whole lot of national strategy. And frankly, in many states, there's not a whole lot of state strategy in thinking about a statewide approach. And as we think about investors and shipper users, we think about systems. We don't necessarily think about one thing, especially if you could improve that system by bringing capital to the table and policy. In terms of the inland system, we would say that some assets, we were looking at Missouri, for example, and some other places a few years ago, have some significant value. They got land. They have rail connectivity in some, maybe a lot of cases. Obviously, they have water transport. And then what otherwise do these assets position themselves with, because of the competitiveness of the Midwest or the West or the South or the Kentucky itself, or your part of Kentucky? And then you start to add up to a cocktail that's kind of interesting, but it may be beyond the legacy business. All I can say is, at least from the private sector, private investor perspective, they're looking for undervalued assets where they can invest if that's of interest and fits and is policy and law. They want investable projects, and there's not a whole lot of places that think that way and can stand up projects for essentially some sort of P3, or at least an adjacent investment where there's a public investment and a private investment that are almost connected to each other. Next slide, thanks. So I'll put some maps up. You know what the US looks like if you go to the next slide, but kind of our perspective around. Now we show this slide. We've got some triangles on the blue triangles on where some of the major coastal seaports are, and then logistics hub size along the coast, and then the major inland port settings in brown. There are others. There are plenty of other regions that have logistics activity, including Kentucky. But in terms of the major complexes, as we would describe it, and some of the investors, some of the major logistics companies, this is sort of how it looks to us today. If you go to the next slide, this is how we're starting to think of it a little differently. So the circles that show up with the yellow circle around them, those are projects that we are investing in, and we and a series of corporate partners are focusing on with private investors, with the state, and if there's a port, there's a port involved or two. But the California project will be the largest inland port in the system, and so the seaports of LA and Long Beach, the busiest seaports in the country, are partners in that, as are the state and a whole raft of government and private sector players. We've stood up an inland port in Utah, which would be about 15,000 acres, and There is no water, but it's going to be rail connected, air connected, and road connected with autonomous truck system, automated structures. It'll be the most sophisticated, cleanest operation in the world because it's green now and it can be built any way we want to build it. And we're going to build the most efficient place in the world to do logistics, and that's going to create opportunity because there's some underlying value in its location anyway. Similarly, I won't go through all these. In New Mexico, around the port in Gulfport in Mississippi, and then in Virginia on the East Coast. So we're thinking about places like that. And if you go to the next slide, so that box in the middle is a place that it touches Chicago, it touches Kansas City, it stretches pretty far east, but doesn't get too close to the East Coast and the seaports, and it touches Memphis, let's say, in the south, and then there's a lot in between. And so that's an area we think has got great potential. How it sits from Kentucky, I don't know, but that's an area we would say has a lot of potential. Next slide. For time, I'll just rush through. In terms of the opportunity, I guess we would say, of course, you've got a legacy business, and that should be invested in, and there's probably all sorts of things that could be done to improve and make that more efficient and attract more. There's going to be some boundaries to what that potential is, but build on that, capitalize on it, move from that, use that as the core. But from there, capitalize on your location. I showed Kentucky in a box, as well as some other states. Which supply chains are vulnerable to your proposition or will be in the future as they are changing? We are deeply involved in the automotive industry, which is really not about car makers anymore. It's about technology. And so, that industry that moved from Detroit to the Ohio Valley into the South, over to Texas a little bit, deeply into Mexico, all that is commodity business chasing low cost. That's still going to be around for the future, but the future of that industry is really about technology, and the technology parts of those companies and their partners are really what's driving the future of what is the largest industry in the world. How does Kentucky sit for things like that? All about multimodal. So it's, for you, you'll know this, you'll say it better than I can, but it's more than barge or vessels. It's going to be almost nothing moves via one mode of transportation anyway. So perfecting that seam between modes, and then recognizing where the modes are headed. On the vessel side, there's one thing. On the truck side, trucks are going to look very different in the future. We're working with every truck manufacturer right now, the technology companies, being in the vanguard of that, taking technology and infusing it into your transport, your logistics, your infrastructure and port strategy can pay great benefits. I know that I should say, I don't know who runs the website or the organization of your inland port organization, but the website is absolutely fantastic. And so we learned a lot by taking a look at that. But we read a little bit about the New Orleans, Gary LaGrange, the intersection there, and that's obvious, and that's absolutely appropriate down the Mississippi River system. But think bigger. Kentucky is an asset that's connected to the coasts, all three of them. Maybe not the Seaway, doesn't matter as much, but it's your connectivity to the connections that take you to the rest of the world. And so New Orleans is a good example of that. But maybe there's examples for different sorts of cargo, east and west, if your logistics vision can take in a wider scope. Aggregated or separate products, maybe that's some of the conversation you're having in some regard, but you got some very, very interesting products. You got some organizations that have got great websites, and we saw videos. A few of those sort of stand out just by looking at the map and reading what you've written around your connectivity and your access to not only Kentucky Metro consumption markets, but Midwest consumption and production markets. You got a lot of locations, and you have connectivity in different directions and assets, market proximity, as I just said. It's all about world-class infrastructure, and delivering on that, and then making a promise of efficiency and adding value to the client. Barge system is a big part of that, and anything that's moving otherwise via another mode is absolutely sort of demanding increasing efficiency. If you could tweak the efficiency of moving cargo in and out of Kentucky by 5%, you're moving the needle on the dashboard, I would say, about investment attraction. Lastly, the differentiator, I would say, we are developing these trade port districts in those areas with the yellow circles, where we bring in telecommunications infrastructure, because this is all about moving data. This is about moving data around where cargo is and how it's moving, and automated trucking. So working with the largest investors in the country and in Europe that own fiber networks and are investing in it. They're investing from logistics hub to logistics hub. We're working with automated trucking. We're working with kind of big engineering investment and planning firms. It's all of that is essentially about creating a clean and automated district in a context that has the underlying competitiveness with the right infrastructure. And folks are wanting automation and efficiency, and many supply chain decisions are going to be made, at least in part, by the clean and carbon neutral footprint. It's going to be, if you're not thinking about it now, we were saying this in Missouri a couple months ago, you will be thinking about it because the client is going to increasingly demand that. And next, and I'll finish it up. I appreciate your time. Sorry to rush through. Good to meet you.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was both functional and visionary. I think that the scope of the work and the analysis that you're doing does fit very nicely into Kentucky's look at an entire system of ports. It's had enormous success recently with the Northern Kentucky recruitment of the mega Amazon facility, and the success in Louisville has been just off the charts. But the benefit of scaling it to an entire network, there's strength in that, both in attracting investment, as you've described. And I would encourage Jeremy and Christina to pursue a discussion of that with you about attracting private capital as well as public capital to position the entire modernization of the Kentucky infrastructure in a way that leverages private investment to help with the scarce public resources. And I think Kentucky is incredibly well positioned to take advantage of the information that you've given, and they already have the vision. And this group of very smart port folks, I think, would lend a lot of credence to a 21st century modernization of the ports as a whole. And my last point was, since you did have experience in the port in Cleveland, and you're aware of the original public-private partnership that created the alliance between all of the ports in the St. Lawrence Freeway. And I think that kind of a scale, or the scale in the Los Angeles or Long Beach or the other three areas of the United States, could be replicated using a Kentucky template for the center of the nation. So with that, I'd like to go on to the next speaker. And I think that is, let me just dub Derek. Thank you very much. I'll let you take a minute and look at Derek's bio. And as you do that, think a little bit about the data that both Tony and our last speaker have provided about the value of knowledge, the value of the data, just as Adam spoke about, validating the value of your property. Underutilized property is incredibly attractive to the private investment. I think that what we'll hear from Derek is an economist with a global understanding of what business intelligence is all about, will help you get a good handle on how to leverage that into making the ports more attractive to state, federal, and private investment. So Derek, if you want to take it from there, be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. Let me share my screen real quick. Okay, can everyone see?
Yeah, I can see it, Derek. Thank you.
Excellent. So today I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach. I wanted to see if I could draw together all the fascinating topics that we've heard over the course of this summit, ranging from talking about changes in federal transportation policy, the implications of that, looking at our expectations on the growth in Kentucky's freight economy and some of the changes that are coming through that, as well as getting an understanding of what's going on in the neighborhood in terms of surrounding states and how they're confronting challenges. And I wanted to see if I could actually bring all of these common elements together to give kind of a integrated way that we can understand pragmatically how do we actually make use of our data to confront the challenges that we're talking about, to better market ourselves and our needs and where we stand in terms of our ability to attract business, to resolve issues, to support and foster economic development. And along the way, what I wanted to do is I also wanted to show some live examples to show, specifically how it's used, because I think in the end of the day, we need to understand how all these pieces fit together, how to get from the beginning point of playing with freight data to coming up with insight that actually solves problems. So really, when we start talking about the usage of freight data in a planning context, it really falls into three distinct phases, where your first phase, you're talking about, raw data exploration, where you're trying to understand what's going on in my markets in terms of, what are the goods that are moving, where are they coming from, going to, how am I trading with my regional as well as broader domestic and international partners, and specifically, what are the modes that are actually conveying these goods and how are they distinct depending on the trading partners. From there, what you do is you then move into a bit of a data enhancement phase where you take this valuable information about your markets and you begin to enrich it to give you a better idea of how to refine and talk about specific stakeholders that you're looking to analyze. Additionally, you add in other measures to go convert from talking about, raw tonnage and value to begin talking about how it actually interacts with the economy as a whole in terms of broader connections and ways that it fosters development. After that, what you do is you then begin into a more of a solution planning concept where you begin constructing scenarios to test your policy and test your effects, as well as conduct some sensitivity analysis before, in the final stage of data analysis, you really enter into a pass-off phase where you fold in the insights that you've just generated into broader analyses, as well as the summarizing of its impacts, so in terms of, who are my stakeholders and how have I just advanced their goals or solved their problems. So, starting at the beginning here, when we're talking about the identifying behavior of markets, I just wanted to throw up a very simple example here, just to show you first off, what is the Transearch data capable of if you've never seen it before. So in this case, what I've done is I've essentially shown a market where we've selected a region of analysis that features basically the core 3 counties in Michigan. And we're looking at essentially what is the outbound freight. And what this shows is this essentially shows 2 things. This shows you what are my markets, as well as what is the infrastructure, in this case, the red lines representing the highway networks that are used to actually get goods to those markets. And as you can see here, we're able to look at our different markets in terms of, where are the majority of our goods being consumed? Is it, in state? Is it out of state, as you can see based on the pie chart? Or are we talking about really, infrastructure fostering connections with a broader international market? Similarly, we have an advantage, I think, in the Transearch data in that it really gives you unparalleled a look into both commodity detail, physical geographic movements, as well as, tied infrastructure. So because it's a routed database, here we're talking about, where's my region? Who am I trading with and doing business with? Well, that's really kind of only one way of actually using the data. On this slide here, you can see another way, which is we can actually come at this from another perspective, which is let's focus on the infrastructure we have. Let's pick a corridor and let's actually look at who's actually using this. Who are, within my region, who is moving goods along this corridor? What are their markets? What roles are they serving within these markets? And, in addition to that, who are other users to kind of demonstrate need? So here you can see an example from an I-80 analysis that we were doing in Iowa to go look at, broader trade shifts and patterns. You can see here just in terms of, the infrastructure and its reliance in terms of serving domestic versus international markets. So this just gives you an idea of just the kinds of information that you can look at and summarize in terms of, the tonnage, the number of vehicles, and the value of goods being shipped and how they actually play a role, both in terms of regional trade as well as from an infrastructure perspective. So, once you get an understanding of what are my markets, what are the goods moving, who are my major trade partners, really at this point, you're then next beginning to get into the enrichment process where you're looking at how can I convert these units of analysis into something that I can then build a further, more rigorous analysis on to look at the impacts of change, but also in addition, begin pivoting towards a measure or a metric that's actually helps with the communication process in terms of reaching, why should I care about this? So really, when we're talking about tons and dollars, it's perfect for infrastructure. But at the end of the day, we want to communicate, it's about these industries in Western Kentucky or Eastern Kentucky, and the industries that they provide in terms of the jobs that they enable, the income from the families that they're able to then, take home and spend in the economy. And so ultimately what we're doing is we're essentially trying to find ways to go pivot this into a broader, more applicable way of using the data. And so to my mind, the most intuitive way of doing it is actually integrating it with a broader model that talks about how do economies make use of freight, both in terms of, we've talked about classic freight data here. It's really about moving from an origin to a destination, talking about the commodities, modes, and information. Well, similarly, when we start thinking about economics and economic models and data, economics is really talking about what are the industries in my region and what are the inter-industry patterns of trade that exist. So when you line the two up, you can see in the diagram below here, you have an origin and a destination, similar like you would in a normal freight database, such as the Transearch database that we just showed. And you can see that there's a commodity moving from one point to another. But what we're able to do by integrating and creating a freight and economic model is we're actually able to break down the commodity movements based on the industry information provided in these economic models to understand what are the industries at the point of origin that are responsible for production. And similarly, on the destination side, how are we able to break it down further to say that, what are the industries responsible for consumption, plus also household final demand, obviously. But the idea being that when you put freight data into a broader economic framework, suddenly you're able to answer a whole lot more questions other than just talking about, what is my market? For instance, we showed infrastructure dependence, but what we're able to do now by incorporating a freight and economic model is to not just say, hey, these are the markets that are actually being served by this vital piece of corridor, but we're also able to say that these are the industries that it enables. These are the jobs, the workers. Similarly, we can incorporate this into looking at the impact analysis of this to look at it in terms of a wider perspective. If we're talking about being able to communicating the importance of it, you could also pivot then to look at what are the tax implications in terms of economic development. Let's say if I'm able to go find corridors that are being, overrun with congestion, or they suffer poor connections, if I'm able to alleviate that and look at how is it actually enhances and fosters economic development, well, I can then take it a step further and I can say to the state that, look, in addition to that, we have an opportunity to make businesses more competitive, attract additional business, and additionally through that, we also have a chance to actually foster, tax revenue to then further prime the pump and give more availability to investment. And in addition to that, when you think about it, when you have freight and economic models, if you can actually break the freight down and towards to describe the industries that are responsible for the production and consumption of those goods as they move around the network, then similarly, if you can say, I have an expectation as a result of a scenario, I expect certain industries to grow or shrink. Based on these connections, you can actually then further posit, what does this mean for my freight network? As I develop these industries, what additional freight can I expect? Where is it going? How is that changing? And once you begin looking at these questions, what you can then do is you can incorporate it into further analytical considerations down the pipeline where you start talking about the industries. Well, when you talk about industries, those industries require workers with specific occupations, and those occupations themselves require certain skills and training levels. What do you have in terms of programs that are actually able to support that? What do you have in terms of available resources, education? What are your worker area characteristics that you have at your disposal right now? And how can you actually invest in that in the future? So you can begin to see here how you can actually draw and enhance from going from freight data to talking about more economic considerations that allow you to go so much deeper. And speaking of talking about freight and economic models and how they fit together, so I just wanted to throw together a quick example here that actually takes that diagram and puts it in place for the state of Kentucky, where you can see here in the center, the columns represent the businesses. So you have your manufacturing, your agriculture and extraction, your utilities, construction sectors. And on the sides, on the left side and the right-hand side, what you can see are actually the commodities that are being consumed on the left side by the respective industries, as well as the commodities that are being produced outbound as outbound goods on the right-hand side. And so what you can see from this is essentially detailed patterns of commodity movement. You can see the linkages between these economies, and it gives you a fascinating way of beginning to understand the role that these goods, these markets play within these industries. So one thing I did want to point out here, though, is when you talk about a lot of markets, especially if you're talking about it from an infrastructure perspective, tonnage is key. What we're measuring here actually is specifically the breakout of economic output. So on the left-hand side, you have the raw commodity inputs. On the right-hand side, you have the value-added outputs together that form economic output. So note that there is no double counting in this, which actually allows us to then take this kind of understanding of how freight interacts with economies, and then pivot to begin looking at, what are the economic impacts and effects of behavioral change, or what is the industry contribution to my broader regional economy? Which, as an example, when we start talking about broader regional economies and reliance on freight to actually go foster industry activity and growth and markets, what I've shown here is I've actually shown if we take that map of how the freight and economics align, what we can do is we can come up with useful, interesting measures that show, on the top left here, just broadly speaking, throughout the state, where is the economic generators of output located? Underneath that, if we apply the method that we've talked about before, and we begin to construct measures about freight dependence, which is how much of my economic activity is actually reliant on commodity inputs or produces commodity outputs, we can begin to see relations between the two. Now, on the top right hand, we can actually just see on an industry by industry basis, because we've actually been able to now pivot from talking about commodities to the industries that consume those commodities or produce those commodities. We can see the varying dependence on freight across all the different economic sectors. Now, unsurprisingly, I think you're going to find that agriculture and extraction, construction, manufacturing, they're all, obviously high consumers of freight activity or producers as well. But what's interesting is if you actually take the data, the detail present in the freight database, you're then able to further stratify it down to look at all of my economic dependent output within Kentucky. How much of that is actually reliant on particular modes? How is that changing over time? Additionally, we can even look at it in terms of a domestic versus international markets in terms of what markets am I most reliant on to go get or ship my goods from that foster my economic development. So as you can see here, these are just some of the common linkages we can apply. And just as a case study, because it was a very recent study that came out, we applied a similar analysis for the Illinois Marine Transportation System Plan, where what we did is we actually captured the port users, so the specific industries that were responsible for moving goods on the waterways, as well as captured the warehousing activities at the various port districts, as well as associated water transportation from your barge operators to your dock, load and unload, as well as the truck and rail activity that's supporting the movement of goods to and from the marine cargo terminals. But I think, this also gets into another layer. So once you have an idea of your freight market, how it actually interacts with your industries, you're then able to look at the broader implications. So it's not just that I have $1 million worth of of marine cargo moving on the system and it supports $1 million of business output. Because of that business output existing, because of those industries, it actually requires further investment throughout the economy in the form of an indirect business purchasing, as well as when we start talking about those workers, the income they earn, that income actually further gets reinvested. So it allows you to look at the sum totality of the impact of your infrastructure here. And on the right hand side, you can see that we've essentially, what we've done is we've broken it down on the basis of the different districts that are handling it, just based on the kinds of freight information that you're seeing here, as well as other data that we've used to augment the analysis, specifically dealing with establishment level data. So now we're kind of moving into the third phase of the analysis, where we've looked at the data in the markets. We've then moved it and pivoted and enriched the data to begin talking about not freight data, but the way it plays in the economy in terms of supporting industries specifically. And now we're getting into more of the application phase, where we're saying, what can we do for economic development? We have certain locations across the state that have unused industrial land. We're trying to go maximize their usage and attract business investment and foster, new companies to come in and set up. What kind of companies do we go for? Another thing you can do with this freight data is you can essentially say, look, we can use this data to figure out what are the advantages that our economy has over other economies, both domestically as well as compared to the rest of the world. So on this left-hand dot plot here, which you can see is essentially just that, we're looking at of all of the commodity activity that takes place within the state of Georgia. The right axis is nationally. Does the US have any kind of advantage in the production of these goods in terms of trade with other markets? And then on the vertical axis, we look at specifically, does my state have an advantage in actually producing this relative to other states in the US? And the idea being that the more you find certain types of manufactured goods, that kind of angle towards that top right corner, are the ones that really you want to focus on. And then within that, if you're interested in trying to figure out site development, site location, what are the best kind of businesses to target? What you can do is you can use the freight data to figure out, which of these commodities that represent certain types of manufacturing that I'm good at are actually, predominantly carried by certain modes. Where are those modes located in terms of access, and how does that play in relation to specifically the different infrastructure available within my state? You can see that on the right hand side. Additionally, what we can do is, now that we're talking about going a step further, we're saying integrating it into a broader analysis. If we've looked at our markets, we understand the economic implications of it. We want to go back and we want to study the connections of our markets to others. What we can do is we can actually use TransSearch data to begin to tell a story, not just of my goods moving, but the role it plays in broader supply chains. So what we can use is we can actually use the economic data integrated with the freight data to begin telling a story about the movement of goods and the roles it plays in terms of inter-industry trade within a value-added chain. So in this case, on the left-hand side, what we're showing is essentially the food manufacturing supply chain, where you have that kind of light beige color representing your raw extractives. So your cattle, your oil seed, your raw agricultural products. Then you have kind of a lighter green shade representing your primary manufacturing, which it converts the raw extractive into a more basic manufactured good. And then in the darker shade over there, you can actually see specific industries that take the more basic manufacturing and convert it into more advanced final stage manufacturing. And the idea being that because economics focus on the inter-industry trade between industries, we are actually able to parse the freight data to show specifically what is the movement between these industries, how do they relate to one another, how do they trade among one another, such that when we apply the freight data, we can actually then look at what are the corridors, what are the infrastructure that actually makes these connections between these industries, between these markets. Where are the bottlenecks? If we were to overlay that over top, we could look at, in terms of, hey, where do we need to invest? Where are certain supply chains, value-added chains, running into capacity constraints? Where are they running into specific issues? Or from a different context, if we wanted to look at strategic investment, look, we have an industry cluster that is just, we believe it's going to be booming in the next 30 years. We want to see, is there anything we can do to kind of help foster its competitiveness? Well, one of the things you can do or look at, what are the infrastructure corridors that are actually they're reliant on? How is performance? And are they running into any, short-term, long-term issues that might potentially impact growth? These are just some of the many ways that we can actually kind of leverage this data to go foster deeper analysis beyond just simply looking at commodity tonnage and markets. Last but not least, because we're talking about economic development, the bit of a natural segue into all of this is that, you're moving from talking about tonnage to industries. Well, these industries, again, how do you talk about industries in terms of the workers they need, the workforce and skills they need, and what do I have in terms of available training? This diagram here actually just shows kind of the linkages between all of three of those. So you have your industries, those industries have certain occupations. Most states have, occupational matrices, or there's also national sources from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that allow you to look at, my industries require certain types of occupations. What is the mix of those? Further from going from there, what you're able then to do is actually look at, the ONET database, which essentially looks at, for all these occupations, what are the kinds of skill training that I need? What kind of worker characteristics, what kind of training programs and education is required, as well as the integrated post-secondary educational data system, which further says, where are my training programs within my state? What kind of training do they offer? What kind of, enrollment or graduation rates and related specifically to these types of occupations or these skills that are so vital to priming the economic pump? Where are they located? How are they doing? So a good example of this, I think, would be from the North Carolina Clean Energy Plan, where what we did is we essentially set up the state with kind of an integrated way of looking at different scenarios of investment to look at, hey, what are the infrastructure? If we invest in certain types of industry and build them up in terms of capacity over time, what does that mean in terms of the available workforce that we're going to need? Specifically, as well as, what level of education, work experience, or job training can we expect from that? Furthermore, what does that do for our region in terms of forming our workforce? Are we talking about workers where we're creating kind of a more higher paying job? Are we creating access in more areas to jobs that are feasible in terms of, the level of skill that workers are being able to be trained in? So this just kind of gives you a high level overview of, the start to finish. How do we actually thread all of these elements together? So in summary, there's a lot of information out there, and it seems like every day there are more data sets available. They're not always the most straightforward to work with. So part of the problem that we're faced with is identifying how do we actually put all of these together? How do we use this information to actually then identify stakeholders? How do we communicate to them? As well as how do we then further talk about, more broad development issues and goals? And I just want to, on the right hand side here, call out specifically, these are just some of the resources that the state has available at their disposal. And, I'm very eager to talk more about how can we actually begin to put all of these information together to kind of begin solving the state's problems. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Derek. That was exceptional. It's so clear that when you develop a blueprint for economic development, that you have to use the business intelligence in order to justify why and under what circumstances the Kentucky port system should receive an incredible influx of new investments. And having that data of why you need to modernize and what that money will be used for and what the return on investment is and justifying it is critically important to the future of the whole system. And I appreciate you looking at the connectivity of education to the economy, because a mismatched workforce will not support the logistics industry, will not support automation of the barges, will not support any of the technology, but an overwhelming wave of new talent will be invaluable as business intelligence to attract new companies, as well as to attract state and federal investment. So I wanted to thank you before I introduce our anchor speaker, who is from the Port of Kentucky, a port of Louisville, which might as well be the Port of Kentucky, and say that I asked Matt to be the anchor because he is Vice President of Economic Development. And so of all the speakers, he has the most hands-on experience in actually transforming ideas into business recruitment, business expansion, relationships with local government, and has recommendations, I hope, that will look forward to bridging the gap of today, how we move forward from today discussing the putting together of a statewide economic strategy and how Louisville approaches it. So with that, I'll let you look at his bio. Matt, thank you for anchoring the team here. I know you've got like a full court press of ideas here to present to everybody. So take it away, please.
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And I got a neighbor's dog barking next door, so bear with me. I can't do much about it. But I'm honored to be on a panel with such some intelligent people, some really high level information. So what do we do with that? For a bunch of guys that unload barges for a living, what do we do with that information, right? So what I've done in the past, I've worked better past the part of the past decade in economic development, indirectly through the Office of Management and Budget, and then indirectly as the Senior Economic Development Manager for the City of Louisville, before coming over in 2017 to the port, Louisville Jefferson County Riverport Authority. So I've been a local economic developer, and I've been a public Riverport Authority employee. So what do we do with this information? And what's Riverport's role in economic development? Economic development being the creation of wealth from which community benefits are realized. What do we need from the Cabinet for Economic Development? But more importantly, what does Kentucky need from us? Ports themselves are catalysts for economic development, right? You don't create a port so that port itself can have a bunch of jobs at the port or what have you. You create a port so we can source commodities, give manufacturers the options in sourcing commodities, and Kentucky can be a more advantageous place to do business. That's our role. So how do you take a bunch of these ports that might have, like us, built for coal in the 1980s, and they're trying to transition to a new economy? What do we do with that? One thing we have to do, and one thing I've noticed that we haven't been great at, is we've got to develop a relationship, being public port authorities, with our local and state economic development. Local and state economic development, they're kind of a clearinghouse for all the tools. They're reaching out to businesses through business retention and expansion. We call that BRE in the industry. And they're asking folks, you know, how's your business going? How's your job growth going? What can we do to help you? So, you know, if there's a manufacturer that turns steel coils into springs in Bardstown, Kentucky, that's spending a lot of money on getting those delivered by truck, I'm not going to know that in Louisville, but the state or local economic development might know that, and they could say, well, you know what, have you talked to our port? Have you thought about you know, bringing in these coils off barges? Have you thought about sending them, you know, via railroad to your site? So is economic development aware of all the assets that your Riverports need? And these are some of the things that we got to do a better job of making sure that they are aware. You know, I think economic development wants to solve problems. They want to help. They want to add value, and ports in turn add value. So when the Commonwealth of Kentucky is recruiting a big manufacturing company that turns aluminum into panels for car parts, are they talking to Brian Wright in Owensboro, who sources a lot of aluminum right there, and saying, hey, you know, we were thinking about putting this manufacturing facility 30, 40 miles inland, but we want you to be at that meeting. We want you to be at the meeting and talk about how you could add some value to this business. You know, this company may not land in Owensboro, but they might use the port of Owensboro to enhance their business, and therefore Kentucky might land land that project. So yeah, so you know, Adam talked about kind of maybe a lack of a state strategy, which I think we're doing the right things now. This whole exercise is something that's past due. I think one theme we've learned from Illinois and Ohio and the ports of Indiana is they have a state strategy behind them. They're collectively supporting their ports. They're collectively thinking about the ROI. If they made X investment into these ports, what kind of return on investment are we going to have as far as job growth in the area? And Kentucky needs to start doing those things. And I think this is a major step in doing that. But one thing we can do now is go ahead and have those conversations at the state level. You know, is the ports participating in Kentucky United trips? Are we going down to the Port of New Orleans with the cabinet secretary? And when the conversation comes up about you know, Riverport access, do we have somebody there to have that conversation? So really, it's just being part of the team. It's making sure that the community is aware of our assets. I think that's on us as Riverport employees. And making sure we're having those frequent meetings with the cabinet, with state economic development. So when we get those leads, they understand what we can do for them, and they understand what they can do for us. I'm happy to turn this into more of a conversation with this.
I would just like to say, Matt, that was a beautiful summary. I think that using the port system as a catalyst, not just as a port for the sake of having a port, but for a catalytic purpose is really what this is all about. In a stronger relationship with the state of Kentucky on business recruitment, I think that growing into that allows the state port system to be much more competitive. I would say from my professional experience in Austin, we made sure to go on every business recruitment trip. And having the ports participate at that level brings a new awareness to the companies that you're recruiting, because it's the hands-on local experience, people closest to the solutions, but to the problems, see the best solutions. And I would like to quickly summarize so that we have questions for Matt. First, I would like to say thank you to the panelists. And as a Kentucky Colonel myself, I'm very happy to be a part of this whole dialogue. Tony talked about how resources and technical assistance is available to future-proof the Kentucky port system. Adam talked about how to link the port system in its entirety into mega resources and how to scale the modernization. Derek talked about using business intelligence to increase the port return on investment and how to identify those patterns, something that needs to be done on an annual basis in order to connect to keep the economic strategy current. And then Matt, he just solved all our problems. So I think we'll open it up for questions. As you begin to think about your questions, I would just like to say that enhancing the fiscal return on investment of the port system, the ROI should optimize equitable economic development too. I think that the state is very concerned about poverty reduction, and the port system can be an incredible prosperity engine to make that happen. And the largest cost of local government expenditures is in areas that support poverty prevention strategies. So we can improve and right-size governments by using the ports to do more than just be a prosperity engine for the ports itself, but also for those communities. So I hope this discussion's been valuable. So I'm going to open it up and for questions. And any questions? Let's start with Matt, since he's on the big screen. Matt, while the questions are being typed up, one of them that has just come in is what advice would you give to the Cabinet for Economic Development that would benefit the Kentucky port system?
Well, so here's the thing is the cabinet doesn't necessarily need to benefit the public port system. The public port system needs to benefit the overall economic vitality of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So really it's the cabinet, the cabinet, if I got a company in Japan and I'm looking to locate in Indiana or Kentucky, I'm not calling Matt Yates, the Louisville Riverport Authority. I'm calling somebody that I know through the governor's office, and I'm getting that lead. And then the cabinet themselves need to understand, we know what, this makes sense. This company is bringing in rolls of steel, and then ultimately they want to go to Hardin County. Well, we need to have Louisville Riverport Authority in this conversation. We need to ask them, do you have a plan for your commodities? We have multimodal options. They're already talking about the great highway system. They're talking about the great central location within the United States, days drive from 2/3 population, and all those great talking points that we use. But are they fully aware of us as tools? And I think the issue is we have a bunch of local riverports, very local riverports, that really are meant to be a catalyst for the broader region. And so I can talk all day to my mayor, and that's important. But it's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. And how can I serve growing industries in the state? What investments can my port make? And then these are all communications that the cabinet could be telling us that, hey, that all that ethanol from Indiana wants to get closer to the river. It wants to come to Kentucky. Who has ability to unload a liquid barge, who could have ability to unload liquid barge if we made XYZ investments, and reach out to us about these opportunities. And then we might say, well, we could do this if the deal was right, and if we had the right project, we can make the investment and make this project work. So I think it's being at the table, and this is not just on the cabinet. It's us who have been so local for so long, need to become bigger than we've been and communicate bigger than we've been and see ourselves as a bigger catalyst for opportunities at a regional and a state level.
I think that's very important. That was a point that Adam made, and I think he's had to jump off, but Kentucky as a unit has greater strength, attracting investment to all the ports may be easier than attracting investment to one port, especially if you add innovation hubs. I see, Tony, you're still on. Would you like to kind of weigh in, or if anybody has any questions for Tony? I know he's pressed for time as well, and I'd like to get us either closing remarks or any questions for Tony about the statewide innovation strategy and its application to the port system. Tony, just go ahead.
I'm happy to take questions.
There's a lot of typing going on here, but maybe just give a few thoughts. You've heard all the speakers now. What is your take on this, the port system trying to future-proof itself and trying to compete in a global, hardball global marketplace? And discussions range from how you diversify your port system revenue streams to how you connect to the local economy where the port sits to be, if they're more prosperous, you can be more prosperous. What is some of your takeaways?
And I think Matt's comment is really correct. You know, it really needs to be more of a continuing dialogue about how can we incorporate the port system into the strategy and sales that we do every day at CED. And I think there is opportunity there to communicate. One of the challenges we always have at the cabinet is, you know, time to market is such a critical piece of our sales pitch these days, right? The time that we can get you to the first sale in Kentucky, and, you know, that in some ways really puts us into a bind because, you know, if we don't have the site available, if we haven't already spent the money to go out and buy the acreage and get it all set up and have it either put into a greenfield or a brownfield site, or we don't have the spec building or any other things, it's a challenge for us sometimes. And this is true nationwide. You know, there's just a site shortage of good, ready sites in America right now. That's true of Kentucky. That's true of everywhere. So, you know, for example, a liquefied gas investment, you know, it's kind of a chicken and an egg situation where we probably need to come together and talk a little bit more about it, because by the time that they're coming to us to look at a deal, that might be something that they want, you know, within 3 months or 6 months, that we may need to have some things that are sort of ready, like could be made ready, where you make an initial investment and get it sort of half set up so that if that's something without going all in and spending the complete resources, it could be ready made in a shorter time frame. Because that's what we hear over and over from businesses. How quickly can you get us to market? And in terms of general economic development, you know, Paducah's got one of the largest barge industries in America. I mean, I think it might even be the largest collection of barge opportunities. So bring some of those companies in and getting to talk to them about specific ways that we could help from an innovation perspective and how they can get engaged to the community. You know, the more people that are aware of the opportunity to use the port system, the more that they're going to talk about it. And the more they talk about it, the more it'll become a regular part of the discussion. So we're happy to think about strategies or ways that we can work on that.
I think that's very, very helpful, and especially the Paducah example and the growing sense of automation. I spoke to an industry group in North Carolina, which does manufacturing, and they're expecting to lose 250,000 jobs due to automation. Do you think that the introduction of innovative automation technology in the barge system and in the ports can both make the speed imperative work, but also generate the kind of human talent to create the automation and to run the software and to reimagine the ports. Do you think that can be done in all the ports? Obviously, it's starting to happen in one major port.
I'm not sure I'm the right person to be able to answer that question. I don't know enough about the ports. What I can tell you is there are a limited number of people that can actually do this work, right? There are just right now, the number of people that have the talent and ability to do some of the really interesting cutting edge AI data analytics work are limited. So the more that we can make them feel like this is an interesting area for them to spend their time and resources and point them in that direction and convince them of the opportunity for exit strategy or investment or capital, or that there's somebody who's willing to buy, the more that will benefit the port system. And we're, from an innovation standpoint, happy to have the discussion with the port system. We do a lot of reverse pitch competitions, right? So we'll say to an industry, tell me what your pain points are, or the port systems, what are your pain points right now? What are the problem? If you could solve any problem within your industry through a technological solution, what is it? And then we'll run a reverse pitch and, bring people in nationally and say, here are 5 pitches for this. And, generally 1 or 2, or sometimes all of those companies will get hired by different people there or a different association to say, look, we're going to make an equity investment. We're going to start it up. And we as the state will then go in and make a small equity investment, help it get started and watch it grow. And that's proven to be very successful.
That would work.
I think both bringing the port system. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's all right. I didn't mean to cut you off. I think that would be very helpful for the port directors who are pretty creative in fostering the economic development around their ports. But this added technical assistance would be very, very helpful. Let me go to Derek. If you have any either closing remarks, Derek, or I see you've been fielding a lot of questions. I see from Donna and 2 or 3 other people about how to use the business intelligence. Do you want to have some closing remarks?
Just as a thought, I mean, now more than ever, we're moving towards a knowledge-based economy that is more savvy and reliant on finding insight from data. So to the extent that we can leverage that in a way that makes it more painless to utilize, I think we're able to actually then find more applications of it to kind of further these development discussions in terms of, what are we good at? What do we have in terms of resources that actually mesh with available opportunities? Attracting new businesses to move into the state is always a good goal. But then there's also the question of, what kind of workforce training programs can we actually set up in the state to also grow the competencies of our labor force? What information do we have on that? How can we automate all of these together in a way that is less confusing and more insightful? I think is kind of the way that organizations across the country are beginning to look at these problems. Excellent
Analysis. Well, thank you, panelists. I'm going to turn it over to Jimmy. He's got some closing remarks, and appreciate your all's insight, and I hope you have a great weekend. Jimmy, you want to pick it up?
Sure. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for putting together such a great panel from a data in transportation trade standpoint, from a national logistics standpoint, and from the local and statewide economics standpoint, both at the port level and with the state level. We thank all of you, Matt, Anthony, Derek, and Adam, who had to slip away for another engagement, but we really appreciate it. And I think one of my big takeaways was to hear the importance of making sure that you have information capabilities, both from an understanding of metrics at your local level, but also from a logistics level, that the investments and the support from economic development agencies and from an understanding at the port level that really having up-to-date data today, and with a clear understanding of what those outputs are, and what it's telling you and what your opportunities are, and giving those users that same information, those investors that same information, and maybe even combining it or converging it with their own information. Sometimes that, that's more kept secret by them, of course, from a competitive level, but engaging them, those opportunities and where the convergence are, is where you really will get those opportunities for additional business, additional investment, growth and jobs, and that return on investment that Anthony was pointing out is so important to be able to really bring things home. We're going to continue these conversations, trying to bring that convergence together with economic development in the ports in Kentucky and develop those broader visions and schemes. So we thank you for your participation. We appreciate you all taking time on your busy schedules to do that. And we'd like to just quickly just thank everybody who attended this second summit for the Kentucky Riverports and their economic development strategies to better leverage their freight networks. And we had a great session here. I'm going to try and just present it while I'm talking. It's always fun to try and do two things at once. But if you can see my screen, the slides kind of just go over what all we were able to accomplish in the past 3 days, which was, a mountain of experts and presenters and information. And we just wanted to let you know that all of these sessions were recorded and will be provided to you on the project website. If you just go to the Kentucky Riverports Highways and Rail Freight Study website, and we can, of course, provide that link out to everybody with a follow-up email. It was in the original email that was sent out. So be sure to go there and keep track of the project as we progress and as we move forward. If Jeremy is available, would you like to just give some closing remarks, Jeremy, to everybody?
I can. On behalf of the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet and as a project manager, I would like to thank everyone for attending the second of our 3 freight summits related to Kentucky's Riverport, Highway, and Rail Freight Study. As Jimmy said, we encourage you to keep apprised of the status of the project by frequently checking the project website. Here you will also be able to access the recordings of the sessions from this summit, as well as the presentations and handouts from the previous summit as well. We also would encourage you to provide your questions, comments, or feedback on the sessions, as well as the project as a whole. The contact information for the project team is available on the website. We also want to thank all the presenters during this summit. We appreciate them for taking time out of their busy schedules to provide us with great information. I also want to thank the project team of Metro Analytics, IHS Markit, Razor Communications, and QK4 for putting together this summit. It has been a lot of work behind the scenes to make this summit a success. And finally, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this summit. We look forward to seeing you at our final summit, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. And we'd just like to let everybody have a wonderful weekend. We appreciate your involvement. And if you have any immediate questions, feel free to send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat here so that you have direct access to me if you need it, and I'll try and direct your questions or answer them myself to the appropriate person. So feel free to reach out to me, and we thank you again, and give you all an extra 11 minutes. So appreciate everybody participating, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, Jimmy. Stay safe.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Thank you.